Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the third chapter in Peter's first epistle. We made it all the way up till the 12th verse. We're going to take it from the 13th all the way to the end. And one of the advantages of doing it this way is that the material we're going to be covering today is not nearly as easily summarized or encapsulated as that which comes before it. So that which comes before it can be described or defined as the dynamics of a Christian marriage. And every culture, culture has its own concept of marriage, but culture is not doing it really right now. Marriage is in the shambles, and just the divorce rate is off the charts. But Christianity does have an answer. Like everything else that's wrong in the world, the solution and the panacea is found in this book, and Peter has much to say about that. Let's just briefly summarize his formula for coexisting in harmony in a same home before we cover what we're going to cover today. So in the first verse it reads, "In the same way, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that if any are disobeying the word, they without a word might be won by behavior of their wives." So the word I want to emphasize is might be won by, it's without a word. So that's the delicate balancing act of preaching the gospel without actually using words. So they witness it through our works, and that is the way he kind of instructs the wives to put up with their husbands, and it's a sacrifice in his view they should make. But the secret of it all is found in the fourth verse. "But the hidden man of the heart, with the incorruptible ornament of a meek and peaceable spirit, which is of great value before Elohim." So meekness is the attribute that the Messiah embodied. He described his yoke as light, and because his spirit is meek. And meekness is a quality that is a lot more natural in women, and it is elevated to an incorruptible ornament, because any characteristic that we have, which is Christ-like, belongs to him, and therefore it is a wonder working in us. And the peaceable spirit can quell any disharmony if they're not inclined to chaos or anything, and it's all of immeasurable treasure to Elohim. In the same way, husbands, you're not let off the leash either. He has something to say about the father, the manly role. In the same way, husbands, live understandingly together, giving respect to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as for being heirs together of the grace of life, so that your prayers are not hindered. There's a lot to digest there. One, women are difficult to understand. You can spend a lifetime with one and still not fully understand them. They are incomprehensible creatures, but that is part of their charm, and we should at least try and get to know the one that we live with and understand her, and what really makes her do the things she does and be the way she is. And of course, you have to respect the wife. You can't abuse her just because you're the authority figure, because they are the weaker vessel. So we have to exercise the authority. So democracy cannot exist among two people. Ergo, one must be the authority, but that does not entitle the authorized one to abuse or demean his wife in any other way, because she is the weaker vessel. Marriage is about equality, so we have to use that superior strength so that two can become one. And we are, of course, heirs. We have the same blessed expectation, the grace of life, and we are reminded to pray. So pray is a duty of wives, of husbands, of Christians everywhere, of sons, of daughters. Prayer warriors, prayer delivers results, and a family that stays together, prays together, stays together. So a lot of families are being torn apart by this divorce rate that is really off the charts and is a saddening spectacle. But we're just going to close with the 9th verse before we cover the range we've determined to. "Not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessing, knowing that you are called to this in order to inherit a blessing." So Peter speaks of the kingdom of priests, much of in our inheritance of a blessing. So like the Abrahamic nation, we are blessed to bless others, because he was going to bless Abraham, and through him all the nations of the earth would be blessed. And we are that blessing as the pan-national assembly. We are heirs to the same life of grace as he is. So we carry the torch very much from our Jewish progenitors, and the psalmist is quoted to say this. Now, when we get to the 13th verse, what he really tries to say is we have to think about before we say what we're going to say is suffering for doing good. Opens up a whole worm of questions, but some of them are going to be answered. And who is the one doing evil to you, if you become imitators of the good? So if we are imitating good and being good, we should not inspire a reciprocal response, because the world is not going to understand us. There's always going to be that hostility between us and them. So therefore, we have to, just take the punches and take the strides and bear the abuse and just be a blessing even when we are cursed in the midst. But even if you suffer for righteousness' sake, you are blessed, and do not fear their threats, nor be troubled. So to suffer for righteousness' sake is a marked distinction between suffering from one's own stupidity or belligerence or just sin nature getting the better of them. Sin, it does lead to suffering, and there is a chain effect and an often immediate reaction, but often we who are walking upright in the way, the most exemplary human model I can think of is Job, are often visited by unforeseen calamities, and we think they're accidents, we think they're conspiracies, but they might be sent by God to mold us in the furnace of affliction. So the theme that I've been trying to establish throughout my recent series on 1 Peter is sanctification onto suffering. So the role and the connectedness of that is really what Peter's all about in my interpretation. Next verse. But sanctify Yahweh Elohim in your heart, and always be ready to give an answer to everyone asking you a reason concerning the hope that is in you, with meekness and reverence. So we are always when questioned and challenged and offered to explain our faith, we should be so ready for that moment that we will have a word on the tip of our tongues, and we can always pray to the Spirit in that moment, because the Master's promise to the disciples was that in that moment, take no thought to premeditation of what you will say. So if they were promised the same power of answer in the midst of their enemies, how much more are we for those who are friends and neutrals and bystanders and just curious onlookers to see what we are and what we are all about as Christians? That's how we convert people, not through doctrine, but just really upholding the most sincere and ethical standards. But the answer is an evangelical opportunity. So in every situation and circumstance we can fathom for which we might have to give an answer for the faith that we have and proclaim and live and are, we will do so with a spirit of meekness and reverence. That means we will not self-exalt ourselves, because when we are reverent and fearful of Yahweh. So we give the honor, acclaim, and witness too. We have to diminish in order that he might increase through us. So that's the whole trickness. And meekness is that characteristics which comes a lot more naturally in women, as we read of in the 4th chapter. But their meekness comes from the hidden man, which is capitalized. So we interpret that as messianic, an allusion to Yahshua. But that's the secret to winning them over, with meekness and reverence. So if we think about Elohim and don't worry about what they're going to do to us, then all will be well, because our focus and concentration will be on the one who is the strength of our song, which is our witness and testimony. It may sound, just ordinary chatter to us, but it is music and sweet-smelling aroma to his nose and music in his ears. Having a good conscience, so that when they speak against you as doers of evil, those who falsely accuse your behavior shall be ashamed. So Christians are to have such a spotless reputation. They should do no evil, so that no evil should be spoken against them. Of course, they're going to speak evil about us no matter what, whether we choose to live life like the Dalai Lama or the Pope or anything else. There is always going to be the potential for slander. But if we are walking in a way that it obviously embodies meekness and just non-confrontational, the world's not going to like us, but we're not at war with the world. The world is at war with us, and the only way we can conquer them by hate power is by the power of love and meekness and surrender. And they will be ashamed for having so slandered us when it's all said and done at the final judgment, of course. For it is better, if it is the will of Elohim, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. So that's obvious at face value. It's better to suffer for righteousness' sake. But the question that this verse poses is, why would Elohim will us? So he wills us to suffer. And why would a loving father do that? And the answer is that a child without discipline is a bastard, to paraphrase one of the verses in Hebrews. But it's really an act of love that we suffer for his name and for his sake and in the course of life. And it's not going to be an accident or a conspiracy. It's going to be his loving, guiding hand, so that we may learn to lean on him, whether abased or abound, and in all things give honor to his name and not our own. Because even Messiah once suffered for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to Elohim, having been put to death, indeed in flesh, but made alive in the spirit. So the obvious thing we want to interpret from Peter is communicating is that the Messiah is our example. So as he suffered, and then when we read of the dimensions of the extent of his suffering and for the sake of it all and what it did to him and what it did for us, we get a really panoramic view of salvation history, of which we are but footnotes. He's the one who made it all happen. He's the one who it's all about. And he was righteous, but he became unrighteous. He became sin. He was sinless. And at that moment in time on the cross, his most exquisite moment of agony while he was hanging there in the air was, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? So at that moment in time, he became sin, and his Father looked away. So he literally became sin, and he was righteous, and we will be clothed in his righteousness if we exercise saving faith and a spirit of repentance and endure to the end. That will bring us to Elohim. So his ministry is that of reconciliation, bridging the gap of the abysmal divide qualitatively between us and divinity that he uniquely could accomplish because he bore our flesh and bore our sin penalty. That is how we are brought to Elohim and returned whole to him as if we had never sinned, because of the atonement, the human atonement, the divine atonement. And this brought about the Spirit because it was necessary for him to depart from the earth so that the Spirit could take his place. And the Spirit guided Peter from Pentecost all the way to the time that he hung upside down and beyond. He is basking eternally in the Spirit, which visited him first on Pentecost and rejoicing in the company of the man who he ministered with on earth. In which also he went and proclaimed unto the spirits in prison. Now this is a mystery verse, and there's a variety of interpretations to it, but we really want to read the full sentence before we comment on it. Who were disobedient at one time, when the patience of Elohim waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 beings, were saved through water. So, when this occurred, the preaching, now the he is capitalized, so that is a reference to the Messiah. And when he did this, it is likened to the days of Noah. So something primordial must have happened between the spirits of man and the spirits of demons, which were interbreeding with humans at this point, the Nephilim. And that's what really turned a man unspeakably evil. So in the days of Noah, the imaginations of man were evil continually. So their every waking thought was evil, and they could not control it. So there was some satanic force there that, but there's always a remnant. Whenever Satan has his grip over the entire earth, there is always a remnant, and Noah was that remnant, preserved through Seth to build the ark, to perpetuate the earth again and to give it a second start. And as we read, the flood is likened to a baptism, which has significance to the Christian. even though Noah wasn't even Jewish. He existed before Jewish people. But the remnant is always a concept that abounds and echoes both through Judaism and Christianity. Which figure now also saves us? Baptism, not a putting away of the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience towards Elohim through the resurrection of Yahshua, Messiah. So the baptism is a figure or a typology, that is a physical illustration which illuminates a spiritual or theological truth. Now the figure here is... I've also heard the ark being compared to the Messiah, and that he is our safety. So as Noah was saved in the ark, so too are we saved in the Messiah, and that alone. But the baptism is the flood, the thing that the ark was in, which it would survive. The flood is likened to a baptism. Baptism washes the slate clean. It's when a sinner who has been born again signifies his lifelong commitment to the born-again experience, and he is determined to live his life to the end for that cause. And so in Noah we have the typological prefiguration of the baptism and its symbolic and spiritual significance to wipe the slate clean. That's when we take a new lease on life and publicly publicly confess our faith in the Messiah unto the resurrection. So the baptism is also a typological reference to the life and burial and resurrection of the Messiah. The death is when we are dunked in the water. The burial is when we are submerged in the water, and the resurrection is when we rise from the water with our sins theoretically wiped clean. This doesn't procure our atonement, but it certainly starts it in motion if we stick to the end. And another way of describing the the resurrection is using natural revelation. So the seasons witness to the resurrection. In fall, everything is buried. That is the death. In winter, everything is dies in fall. Then it's buried in winter under a blanket of snow. Then in the spring, the plant life growth that we witness is a reminder of the resurrection. So we want to look at all revelation with the supreme and ultimate form of revelation, Yahshua Messiah, with him in mind, and not the other lesser form of revelation, not the reverse. One final verse. Who having gone into the heavens and is at the right hand of Yahweh, angels and authorities and powers have been subjected to him. This is a blanket slate of his supreme authority, his uncontested, unrivaled, unequaled, unduplicated, uniquely his authority. Every angel is lesser than him. He is at the right hand of the Father, the place of most intimate proximity and symbolic power of significance. And he sits there as our advocate and our sympathetic high priest. So to tie it into the theme of suffering unto sanctification, suffering is an investment with eternal dividends when we suffer for his name's sake and not our own. And I hope I gave you clear enough guidelines of the difference earlier. Maybe I didn't, about how to determine whether you're suffering from your own sin or suffering for righteousness' sakes and therefore his. So I hope that's the reason you're here. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.